The great crystal towers of Nexus Prime reached high into the purple sky. Inside the tallest tower, beings from across the galaxy sat around a massive table made of floating light. Fear filled the air like smoke from a dying fire. Ambassador Zethkar stood on his 4 legs and looked at the other aliens around the table. His gray skin was covered in sweat, and his 3 eyes kept blinking as he tried to control his terror. The hologram above the table showed the latest report from the outer rim. Another solar system was gone, completely gone. Friends, Zethkar sighed, his voice shaking through the translation device that hung around his neck. We have lost the Kepler colony. The room fell silent. 12 billion people had lived on those worlds just 3 days ago. Now there was nothing but empty space and floating rocks. Vexthal, the military director, clicked his sharp teeth together. He was tall and thin like a walking stick, with armor that covered his insect-like body. His voice was cold and angry when he spoke. The Devourers took everything again. Our best ships could not even slow them down. They ate our energy weapons like candy and grew stronger. Other voices filled the room. Some aliens cried. Others shouted in fear or anger. The Galactic Council had ruled space for 10,000 years. But now they faced something they could not understand or fight. Zethkar raised one of his 4 arms to ask for quiet. Please, friends, we must think clearly. Our computers have run every possible battle plan. Our scientists have tested every weapon we know. Nothing works against these creatures. On the hologram, images of the Devourers appeared. They did not look like normal spaceships. They were alive, dark and twisted like giant insects made of metal and flesh. They moved through space like sharks through water, leaving trails of destroyed worlds behind them. They adapt to everything we try, said Dr. Melanie, the chief scientist. Her blue skin was pale with worry. When we use laser weapons, they grow mirrors on their skin. When we fire missiles, they create fields that turn the explosives back at us. When we try to ram them, they become like gas and let our ships pass through without harm. The room filled with worried voices again. For 3 months, the Devourers had moved through the galaxy like a hungry fire. No one knew where they came from. No one knew what they wanted. They just consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next system. Zethkar looked around the table at the faces of his friends and allies. These were the smartest and strongest beings in the galaxy. They had solved problems that seemed impossible before, but now they all looked lost and afraid. There is one option we have not tried, Zethkar said quietly. The room became silent again. Everyone knew what he meant, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Vexthal's mandibles clicked faster. You cannot be serious. The humans, they are barely civilized. They still use chemical rockets and nuclear bombs. Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. Yes, Zethkar said. But our scouts have sent back strange reports from the frontier regions. He touched a control on the table, and new images appeared in the hologram. These showed human ships in battle. The ships looked rough and ugly compared to the clean lines of council vessels. They were covered in extra armor welded on in random places. Weapons stuck out from their hulls like thorns on a bush. Look at how they fight, Zethkar said. The recording showed a human cargo ship facing 3 pirate vessels that were much larger and better armed. Instead of running away or calling for help, the human ship turned and flew straight at the biggest pirate ship. Just before they would crash, the human ship fired everything it had and then actually did crash into the enemy. Both ships exploded, but the other pirates ran away. They are insane, whispered Dr. Melanie. Are they? Zethkar asked. Or are they something we have forgotten how to be? More recordings played. Human miners fighting off alien raiders using mining equipment as weapons. Human explorers turning their survey ships into moving fortresses when they found hostile life forms. In every case, the humans did things that made no sense according to normal military thinking. They modify civilian ships for combat, Vexthal said with disgust. They ram their vessels into enemies instead of retreating. They use industrial tools as weapons. They fight with no regard for their own safety. Exactly, Zethkar said. We cannot predict what they will do because they do not follow logical patterns. Our military computers cannot model their behavior because it is based on emotions and instincts instead of calculations. He looked around the table again. If we cannot predict them, perhaps the Devourers cannot either. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some aliens argued that asking humans for help would be like asking wild animals to solve a mathematics problem. Others pointed out that wild animals sometimes survived where civilized beings died. Dr. Melanie pulled up more data about humans. They have been in space for less than 100 years. Their fastest ships take months to travel distances we cross in days, but look at this. New images showed human settlements on worlds that should have been impossible to live on. Burning planets where the air was poison, frozen moons with no atmosphere, ocean worlds where the water would dissolve most metals. They do not adapt to environments, Dr. Melanie said with wonder in her voice. They adapt environments to themselves. When they find a world too hot, they do not leave. They build machines to cool it down. When they find a world with no air, they do not wear suits. They build domes and fill them with air they make. Vextel's clicking grew louder. This proves they are dangerous. They change everything they touch. What if they decide to change us? What if that is exactly what we need? Zethkar asked. The Devourers adapt to whatever we do. But what if we become something they cannot adapt to? What if we become more like humans? The idea was terrifying to many of the aliens around the table. The Galactic Council had spent thousands of years becoming civilized. They used logic and science and careful planning. They avoided violence when possible and used it efficiently when necessary. They were proud of how far they had come from their primitive ancestors, but now those primitive ancestors might be their only hope. There is something else, said Commander Theises, who had been quiet during most of the meeting. She was from a species that looked like tall cats with 6 arms. The humans have been asking questions. What kind of questions? Zethkar asked. They want to know about our weapons technology, our ship designs, our tactical databases. They say it is for trade and scientific exchange, but our analysis suggests they are studying how to fight us. The room grew cold. The idea that humans might be preparing for war against the Council was almost as frightening as the Devourers. Or, Zethkar said carefully, they are studying how to fight like us so they can fight with us. He activated another display. This one showed the current position of the Devourer fleet. They had consumed 17 solar systems and were moving toward the core worlds where most of the galaxy's population lived. We have perhaps 2 months before they reach the major colonies. 4 months before they threaten the Council worlds themselves. Our fleets cannot stop them. Our weapons cannot hurt them. Our defenses cannot slow them down. Zethkar looked directly at each alien around the table. We can die with our pride intact, or we can ask for help from beings we do not understand and hope they can do what we cannot. The vote was close. Many aliens voted against contacting the humans. They feared that bringing such violent and unpredictable beings into the war would make things worse. But fear of the Devourers was stronger than fear of humanity. When the final count was made, the decision was clear. The Galactic Council would send a message to Earth. As the meeting broke up and the aliens began to leave, Vextel approached Zethkar. His mandibles were still clicking, but more slowly now. If we do this, the military director said, we may win the war against the Devourers only to find ourselves facing a war against the humans. Zethkar looked out through the crystal walls of the tower at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were moving closer. Somewhere else, humans were building their strange ships and planning their impossible plans. Perhaps, he said. But at least we will be alive to fight that war. The message was sent on old radio frequencies that humans had used when they first learned to communicate across space. It was simple and direct, the way humans seemed to prefer their communication. This is Ambassador Zethkar of the Galactic Council, speaking to the government of Earth and her colonies. We face an enemy that threatens all life in the galaxy. We have tried everything in our power to stop them and failed. We formally request immediate assistance from humanity in this matter of galactic survival." The message traveled through space at the speed of light, carrying with it the hopes and fears of trillions of beings. It would take time to reach Earth and more time for the humans to respond. But Zethkar had studied the humans enough to know one thing for certain. When someone asked them for help against impossible odds, they never said no. They just started planning how to make the impossible possible. Captain Sarah Chun was drinking coffee and reading maintenance reports when the message arrived. Her ship, the Ragnar's Wrath, sat docked at Kepler Station like a wounded animal getting patched up. The ship had started life as a cargo hauler, but Sarah and her crew had changed it into something else entirely. The hull was covered in armor plates from 6 different ships. Weapon mounts stuck out at odd angles. The engine glowed so hot that other ships had to dock far away to avoid getting burned. It was ugly and dangerous, and Sarah loved it like her own child. "Captain," called out her communications officer, a young man named Tommy Park. "We're getting a weird signal on the old emergency frequencies." Sarah put down her coffee. The old emergency frequencies had not been used for 20 years. Only historians and radio hobbyists remembered they existed. "Put it through," she said. The voice that came through the speakers was strange. It spoke English, but with an accent that sounded like it was being translated by a machine. The message was short and simple, but it made Sarah's blood run cold. When the message ended, Sarah stared at the speakers for a long moment. Then she started laughing. "Tommy, send a copy of that message to Earth Defense Command, Mars Central, and the Outer Colony Council. Mark it Priority 1. Yes, ma'am. Should I include our response?" "Not yet. First, I want to talk to some people." Within 6 hours, every major human military leader was either heading for the meeting point or already talking on secure channels. The response was faster than anything the aliens had seen from human governments before. Admiral Marcus Torres received the message while reviewing fleet exercises near Jupiter. He was a tall man with gray hair and scars on his hands from years of working on ships before he became an officer. He read the message 3 times, then called his staff into the war room. "Gentlemen and ladies," he said, looking around at his officers, "we just got invited to the biggest fight in galactic history." His tactical officer, Commander Liu, frowned at the data. "Sir, if these aliens are telling the truth, we're looking at an enemy that has destroyed multiple spacefaring civilizations. Our technology is primitive compared to what the Galactic Council has." Admiral Torres smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Commander, our technology has never been our strongest weapon." Meanwhile, on Mars, Commodore Yuki Tanaka was already preparing her ships for departure. The Mars Free State had always been different from Earth. Mars was a hard world that killed anyone who made mistakes. The people who lived there were tough and practical and very good at making do with whatever they had. Tanaka's ships reflected this attitude. They were built like weapons first and life support systems second. The crews called them coffin ships, because they were nearly as dangerous to their own people as they were to enemies. But they were fast and they hit hard and they never, ever gave up. "How long to reach the meeting point?" Tanaka asked her navigator. 18 hours if we push. The engine's hard. Push them harder. If someone is asking for help against impossible odds, we don't want to be late to the party. The most unusual response came from the outer colonies. Captain Yakov Petrov was not officially part of any military. He was a former pirate, former miner, former smuggler, and current captain of the ship Pandemonium. When the message reached the outer rim, Petrov was in the middle of converting a broken asteroid mining station into a mobile weapons platform. His crew was a mix of criminals, engineers, and people who were too crazy for normal jobs. They had somehow managed to acquire technology that should not have existed, weapons that violated several laws of physics, and a complete disregard for safety regulations. "Boys and girls," Petrov announced over the ship's intercom, "we just got the best job offer in the history of the universe." His chief engineer, a woman named Rosa Santos, looked up from the experimental engine she was building. "What kind of job?" "The kind where we get to shoot at something that everyone else is afraid of." Santos grinned. I'll prep the fun stuff. The meeting point was a neutral space station orbiting a dead star. The humans arrived in ships that made the alien observers very nervous. Nothing matched. Every ship looked like it had been built by different people with different ideas about what a spaceship should look like. Admiral Torres arrived first in the Indomitable, a proper military vessel with clean lines and organized weapon systems. It looked normal except for the modifications that let it carry twice as many missiles as it was designed for. Commodore Tanaka's squadron looked like flying weapons. Her ships were all sharp angles and armor plating with engines that burned. So bright they hurt to look at. They moved through space like angry hornets, looking for something to sting. Captain Petrov's ship was the strangest of all. The pandemonium looked like someone had taken parts from a dozen different ships and welded them together with no plan at all. It bristled with weapons that had no names and equipment that should not have worked. The engine exhaust changed colors as it burned, and space itself seemed to bend around the ship in ways that made alien scientists very uncomfortable. The alien delegation was waiting for them in the station's main conference room. Ambassador Zethkar tried to hide his fear as he watched the human commanders enter. They moved like predators, constantly alert and ready for violence. Admiral Torres took the lead. He was polite but direct. Ambassador, we received your message. Before we discuss helping you, we need to know everything about this enemy. Of course, Zethkar said. He activated the holographic display and began showing the humans everything the Council knew about the Devourers. The presentation lasted 2 hours. The aliens showed battle recordings, technical analysis, and detailed reports of every failed attempt to stop the enemy. They explained how the Devourers adapted to every weapon, every tactic, every strategy. The Council had tried. The humans watched in silence. They asked technical questions about energy levels and adaptation rates. They wanted to know about response times and regeneration capabilities, but mostly they just watched and learned. When the presentation ended, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Captain Chun leaned back in her chair and shook her head. You people think too much, she said. Ambassador Zethkar blinked his 3 eyes. I do not understand. You see an enemy that adapts to whatever you do, so you try to think of something they can't adapt to, but that's backwards thinking. Admiral Torres nodded. The problem isn't that they adapt to your weapons. The problem is that you're using weapons they can adapt to. Commodore Tanaka studied the tactical displays with the eye of someone who had spent years fighting in impossible situations. You fight like you're trying to solve a puzzle. But this isn't a puzzle, it's a bar fight. Captain Petrov was grinning. Like a maniac. Show us where they are now. The aliens updated the display to show the current position of the Devour fleet. They were moving through a system called Tau Ceti, consuming the planets one by one. How long before they finish there and move on? Admiral Torres asked. Perhaps 6 days, Zethkar replied. Good, that gives us time to prepare. Dr. Melanie. The alien scientist leaned forward. Prepare what? We have shown you that conventional weapons are useless against them. Captain Chun smiled. Who said anything about conventional weapons? The humans spent the next hour asking questions that made no sense to the aliens. They wanted to know about stellar mechanics and gravitational fields. They asked about the physics of hyperspace travel and the energy requirements for planetary destruction. They seemed more interested in the environment where the battle would take place than in the enemy they would be fighting. I still do not understand your strategy, Vexthal said. His mandibles clicked with frustration. That's because we don't have a strategy, Admiral Torres replied. We have an approach. What is the difference? A strategy is a plan to achieve a specific goal using known methods. An approach is a way of thinking that lets you adapt to whatever happens. Captain Petrov laughed. You want to know our approach? Here it is. We're going to show up with the biggest, nastiest, most dangerous ships we can build. Then we're going to start shooting and see what happens. But the Devourers will adapt to whatever you do, Dr. Melanie protested. Will they, Commodore Tanaka? asked, "Let me ask you something. How do you adapt to insanity?" The aliens looked at each other in confusion. "Your enemy has spent millions of years learning to counter logical tactics," Admiral Torres explained. "They know how to deal with energy weapons, kinetic weapons, exotic matter weapons. They know how to counter every rational military strategy ever developed. But what they don't know," Captain Chun added, "is how to deal with people who don't use rational strategies." Captain Petrov was nodding enthusiastically. "They've never faced someone who looks at a problem and says, 'I bet I could fix this with a bigger explosion.'" The meeting continued for several more hours. The humans asked for detailed technical specifications about devourer biology and capabilities. They wanted to know about every battle, every encounter, every piece of data the Council had collected. But they also asked questions that seemed completely unrelated. They wanted to know about stellar engineering and industrial capacity. They asked about mining operations and manufacturing capabilities. They seemed to be planning something much bigger than a simple military engagement. "There is one thing I must ask," Ambassador Zethkar said, as the meeting wound down. "If you help us defeat the Devourers, what do you want in return?" The humans looked at each other. Admiral Torres spoke for all of them. "We want to be left alone to do our own thing. No membership in your council, no interference in our affairs. Just recognition that we exist and the right to handle our own problems our own way. That is all." "But surely you want access to our technology, our trade networks, our knowledge bases." Captain Chun shook her head. "We like building our own stuff. It's more fun that way." As the aliens prepared to leave, Ambassador Zethkar had one more question. "Admiral Torres, may I ask why you agreed to help us? You gain very little from this arrangement." Torres thought for a moment. "Because you asked nicely, and because we were getting bored." After the aliens left, the human commanders gathered in Admiral Torres' quarters. The room was quiet as they considered what they had just committed to do. "Are we really going to try this?" Commander Liu asked. "Try what?" Torres replied. "We haven't even decided what we're going to do yet." Captain Petrov was studying star charts and making notes that would have terrified any sane engineer. "I have some ideas." "That's what I was afraid of," Commodore Tanaka said, but she was smiling when she said it. Captain Chen looked around at her fellow humans. They were about to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations spanning thousands of years. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and fighting with technology that was primitive compared to what the enemy had already defeated. "You know what?" she said. "This is going to be fun." Outside the station, human ships were already beginning to gather. Word had spread through the colonies faster than official channels could carry it. Miners were converting their equipment into weapons. Traders were adding armor to their cargo holds. Even civilian vessels were volunteering to join the fleet. They were not the most advanced ships in the galaxy. They were not the most elegant or efficient. But they were built by humans, crewed by humans, and commanded by people who thought impossible odds were just another word for Tuesday. The Devourers had never faced anything like them before, and they were about to find out why that was a very serious problem. The human fleet that gathered at the staging area looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. Ships arrived from every corner of human space, and no two looked alike. Some were proper military vessels with neat rows of weapons and clean armor plating. Others were cargo ships covered in metal plates welded on wherever they would fit. A few were mining vessels that still had rock drills attached to their hulls. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of Ragnar's Wrath and watched the chaos through her viewports. Her ship was docked next to a converted passenger liner that someone had turned into a missile platform. On the other side was a mining ship that glowed with radiation from its modified fusion engines. "Tommy, how many ships do we have now?" she asked her communications officer. Tommy Park checked his screens and shook his head. "I stopped counting at 300, Captain. Ships keep arriving every few hours." "What kind of ships?" "Everything. We've got military cruisers, cargo haulers, mining ships, research vessels, passenger liners, and at least 6 ships that I can't identify at all." Chun nodded. That sounded about right for a human fleet. When word had spread that someone needed help fighting an impossible enemy, volunteers had come from everywhere. Not just military personnel, but miners and traders and explorers and even some reformed pirates. The alien observers were having nervous breakdowns trying to understand the human organization system. Council observer Quillith had sent 17 reports back to Nexus Prime, each one more confused than the last. They have no proper chain of command, Quillith reported to Ambassador Zethkar. Ships arrive, declare their intention to help, and then begin modifying themselves for combat. No one gives them orders, no one assigns them positions. They simply organize themselves into groups based on what they want to do. The groups that formed made no sense to alien military thinking. There were the fire ships, vessels that had been loaded with experimental weapons and improvised explosives. The heavy hitters were mining ships and industrial vessels that had been turned into mobile weapons platforms. The speed demons were fast ships designed to cause confusion and chaos, but the group that worried the alien observers most was the one led by Captain Yakov Petrov. They called themselves Legends Dangerous, and they seemed to be competing to see who could build the most insane weapons. Petrov's ship, Pandemonium, sat at the center of this group like a spider in a web. Over the past week, his crew had made modifications that violated several laws of physics and at least one treaty about safe space travel. What exactly are you building over there? Admiral Torres asked during one of the daily briefings. Petrov grinned. His beard was singed from working too close to dangerous equipment, and his eyes had the look of someone who enjoyed playing with explosives. We're making what my engineer calls a physics violation drive, he said. It takes the normal rules about how energy and matter work and politely ask them to step aside. Is it safe? Commodore Tanaka asked. Define safe. Will it kill you when you turn it on? Probably not. Will it kill everyone else when you turn it on? Petrov thought about that for a moment. I'll let you know after we test it. Admiral Torres rubbed his forehead. Leading a normal military fleet was hard enough. Leading a collection of humans who thought safety regulations were suggestions was giving him headaches. Captain Petrov, please tell me you're not planning to test an experimental physics violation drive in the middle of our staging area. Of course not, Petrov said. We're going to test it during the battle. That way, if something goes wrong, at least we'll take some enemies with us. The modifications being made to the human ships were unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Captain Chin's crew had replaced her cargo bays with weapon systems that had been salvaged from 6 different alien technologies. The weapons didn't match, and they probably shouldn't work together, but her chief engineer swore they would create interesting effects. When fired, Commodore Tanaka's ships were being upgraded with armor plating made from compressed asteroids, and engines that burned hot enough to melt nearby space debris. Her crews called the modifications barely controlled stellar engines, which was either very accurate or very optimistic. The converted civilian ships were even more creative. Passenger liner had been turned into a missile boat with launch tubes installed where the swimming pools used to be. A research vessel had been equipped with experimental beam weapons that were designed to study star formation but worked surprisingly well for destroying enemy ships. Dr. Melanie, the alien scientist, tried to understand what the humans were doing by studying their technical specifications. After 3 days, she gave up and sent a report that simply said, human military engineering appears to be based on the principle that if something is dangerous enough, it becomes a weapon. The supply situation was equally confusing to alien observers. Normal military fleets required careful planning to ensure adequate food, fuel, and ammunition. The human fleet seemed to create its own supplies out of raw materials and creative thinking. Mining ships that had joined the fleet spent their time processing asteroids into raw metals. Manufacturing ships that normally built space stations were retooling to produce weapons and armor. Even some of the smaller ships had been converted into mobile factories. They are turning the entire fleet into a self-sufficient industrial complex, Observer Quillith reported. They are not just preparing for a single battle. They are preparing to sustain a campaign of indefinite length. What the aliens didn't understand was that this was how humans had always worked. When faced with a problem, they didn't just solve it. They built the tools to solve it, then improved the tools, then found new problems to solve with the improved tools. Captain Petrov's group exemplified this approach. They had started with one experimental weapon system and had somehow expanded it into a collection of devices that would have made alien weapons designers run away screaming. "Rosa, show me what you've done to the main engine," Petrov said to his chief engineer. Rosa Santos led him through the ship to the engine room. What had once been a normal fusion reactor was now something that belonged in a physics textbook's chapter on theoretical impossibilities. "We've added a miniaturized black hole generator," Rosa explained. "It creates a gravity well that we can use to manipulate space-time around the ship. Can we use it as a weapon?" "Captain, we can use it as anything we want." Reality becomes very flexible when you have your own personal black hole. Petrov nodded as if this made perfect sense. "What about the stellar fusion accelerator?" "That's the fun part. We can feed matter directly into nuclear fusion and use the black hole's gravity to accelerate the plasma to near light speed. Basically, we can turn the ship into a temporary star." "How temporary?" "Depends on how much matter we feed it. Could be minutes, could be hours. And we can control the direction of the energy output, more or less. The controls are a bit touchy, but I think we can avoid accidentally sterilizing any friendly planets." This conversation was being monitored by alien observers who were trying to understand human tactical planning. When they heard it, 3 of them fainted and 2 others requested immediate transfer to non-combat duties. Admiral Torres was also monitoring the conversation, but his reaction was different. He called Captain Chun and Commodore Tonica to a private meeting. "We need to talk about Petrov," he said. "What about him?" Chun asked. "He's building weapons that could destroy solar systems. His ship is becoming more dangerous than most space stations. If something goes wrong during the battle, he could accidentally kill everyone on our side," Tanaka shrugged. "So we make sure we're not too close to him when he starts shooting." "That's not the point. The point is that we're supposed to be helping the aliens, not scaring them to death." Chun looked at the tactical displays showing Petrov's ship. The pandemonium was surrounded by energy readings that shouldn't exist and gravitational anomalies that made nearby space navigation hazardous. "Marcus," she said, "the aliens asked for our help because their logical, safe, rational approach wasn't working. If we start acting logical and safe and rational, we'll fail just like they did." "She's right," Tanaka added. "The enemy adapts to conventional threats. Petrov isn't conventional, he's not even sane. That makes him our best weapon against something that can adapt to everything else." Torres knew they were right, but that didn't make him feel better about it. He had spent his career trying to minimize risks and ensure mission success through careful planning. Now he was betting everything on people who treated careful planning as something to ignore. "All right," he said finally. "But I want to make sure everyone understands the stakes. We're not just fighting for humanity. We're fighting for every intelligent species in the galaxy. If we lose, everything dies." "If we lose," Chun said, "it won't be because we weren't dangerous enough." The final week of preparation was a blur of activity. Ships that had arrived separately began working together in ways that defied military organization charts. Crews shared equipment and expertise across faction lines. Engineers from different ships collaborated on projects that would have been impossible for any single vessel to complete. The result was a fleet that looked like it had been designed by a committee of mad scientists. Nothing matched, nothing followed standard procedures. Nothing made sense according to normal military thinking, but it worked. When Admiral Torres called the final briefing before departure, he looked around at the commanders who had volunteered for what might be the most dangerous mission in galactic history. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "in 12 hours, we depart for Tau Ceti to face an enemy that has destroyed civilizations spanning millions of years. Our ships are experimental. Our weapons are untested, our tactics are improvised." He paused and looked at each face around the table. Any questions? Captain Petrov raised his hand. Just one. Are we allowed to use experimental weapons that might accidentally tear holes in space-time? If it helps us win, yes. Good, because I wasn't going to leave them behind anyway. Captain. Jun laughed. Jakob, if you accidentally destroy the universe, I'm going to be very annoyed with you. Don't worry. If I destroy the universe, you won't be around long enough to be annoyed. This was the moment when the alien observers finally understood what they were witnessing. The humans weren't just preparing for battle. They were preparing to rewrite the rules of battle. They were going to face an enemy that adapted to everything by becoming something that couldn't be adapted to. They were going to become legends. Dangerous enough to save the galaxy. As the fleet prepared to depart, Captain Torres received a final message from Ambassador Zethkar. Admiral, the Council wishes you success in your mission. Please remember that the fate of trillions depends on your actions. Torres sent back a simple reply. We understand. Don't worry, we've got this. The alien diplomat stared at the message for a long time. 3 words. We've got this. Such simple confidence in the face of impossible odds. Either the humans were the answer to the galaxy's prayers, or they were about to provide the most spectacular failure in recorded history. Zethkar found himself hoping it would be the former, because if it was the latter, there wouldn't be anyone left to record it. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare becoming real. Their ships were not built, they were grown. Dark flesh mixed with twisted metal to create vessels that pulsed with hungry life. Each ship was different, shaped by the civilizations it had consumed and the battles it had survived. Captain Sarah Chun watched them appear on her sensors and felt her blood turn cold. The enemy ships were huge. The smallest one was larger than Earth's biggest space station. The largest was the size of a small moon and covered in weapons that had no names in any human language. Tommy, how many are there? She asked. Her communications officer's voice was tight with fear. I count 47 major vessels, Captain. Plus hundreds of smaller craft? And they're all alive? The energy readings suggest they are biological constructs with technological augmentation. They're not just ships, they're creatures. Shun nodded. She had read the alien reports, but seeing the Devourers in person was different. These things had eaten entire star systems. They had destroyed civilizations that had ruled space for thousands of years. They were death itself given form and purpose, but Jean was not afraid. She was excited. All ships, this is Ragnar's wrath, she broadcast on the fleet frequency. Remember what we talked about? These things adapt to logical tactics. So don't. Use logical tactics. Tommy, patch me through to Admiral Torres. Torres' voice came through clearly. Sarah, I see them. Are you ready? Born ready, Marcus. What's the plan? Same as always. 'Cause maximum chaos and see what happens. I like it. Simple and direct. The human fleet spread out across space in a formation that would have made alien military analysts weep. There was no proper battle line, no organized squadrons, no logical positioning based on ship capabilities. Instead, the humans had arranged themselves based on what they wanted to. The fast ships clustered together near the edge of the formation, ready to dart in and cause confusion. The heavy ships formed loose groups that could provide mutual support. The experimental ships scattered randomly throughout the fleet, ready to try whatever insane weapons they had built. At the center of it all, Captain Petrov's pandemonium hung in space like a dark star. Energy readings from his ship were so intense that other vessels had to stay at least 1,000 kilometers away to avoid getting fried by radiation. The Devourers completed their emergence and began to move toward the human fleet. They moved like a school of predatory fish, flowing through space with perfect coordination. Their weapons began to glow as they prepared for battle, but the humans didn't wait for them to get ready. Captain Jun's Ragnar's wrath fired first. Not at the enemy ships, but at the space around them. Her modified weapons created cascading energy waves that interfered with the Devourer's emergence from hyperspace. Ships that were still materializing suddenly found themselves caught half in normal space and half in hyperspace. The effect was immediate and devastating. 3 Devourer ships were torn apart by the conflicting dimensional forces. Another 5 were damaged and struggling to complete their transition to normal space. The Devourers had never experienced anything like it. In millions of years of warfare, no enemy had ever attacked them during the vulnerable moment of hyperspace emergence. Their adaptation systems immediately began analyzing the attack to develop countermeasures, but before they could adapt, Commodore Tanaka's squadron struck. Her ships came in fast and low, riding the solar wind like surfers on an ocean wave. They used the star's own magnetic field to accelerate beyond what their engines could normally achieve. The Devourer's sensors, designed to track conventional spacecraft, lost them in the stellar radiation. Tanaka's ships appeared among the enemy formation like angry hornets. Their weapons were not designed to destroy the massive Devourer ships. Instead, they targeted the smaller symbiotic creatures that lived on the hulls of the larger vessels. The Devourers used these symbiotes for repairs and adaptation. Without them, the larger ships became vulnerable to sustained damage. Tanaka's crews had studied the alien data carefully and identified this weakness, but they didn't attack the symbiotes with weapons. They attacked them with music. The Mars-free state had discovered that certain sound frequencies could disrupt biological processes. Tanaka's ships broadcast sonic weapons that turned the symbiotes' own nervous systems against them. The creatures began attacking their host ships instead of protecting them. Again, the Devourers had never faced anything like it. They began adapting their symbiotes to filter out harmful frequencies, but the humans had prepared for this. Each ship broadcast different frequencies, creating a chaotic symphony of destruction that was impossible to filter completely. While the enemy was dealing with sonic attacks and dimensional interference, the converted civilian ships began their own assault. The passenger liner that had been turned into a missile platform launched everything it had. But these were not normal missiles. Each warhead contained a small piece of exotic matter that had been salvaged from alien technology. When the missiles hit their targets, they didn't explode in the usual sense. Instead, they created tiny pockets of altered physics where the normal rules of reality stopped working. Some areas experienced time dilation, causing parts of enemy ships to age thousands of years in seconds. Other areas had their fundamental forces reversed, causing matter to repel itself instead of holding together. A few areas simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The Devourer's adaptation systems went into overdrive trying to understand what was happening to them. They had protocols for dealing with energy weapons, kinetic weapons, biological weapons, and even exotic matter weapons. But they had no protocols for dealing with weapons that attacked the basic structure of reality itself. They struggled to adapt. More human ships joined the battle. Mining vessels used their planet-cracking charges to create artificial gravity wells that trapped enemy ships. Research vessels fired modified stellar analysis beams that turned enemy armor into plasma. Even some of the cargo ships got into the action, ramming enemy vessels while broadcasting messages that roughly translated to surprise. But the real show was just beginning. Captain Petrov had been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what he and his crew had built. As the battle raged around him, he gave the order that would either save the galaxy or destroy it. Rosa, activate emergency protocol, burn everything. His chief engineer grinned and began the activation sequence for their physics violation drive. Deep in the heart of pandemonium, the miniaturized black hole generator came online. Reality around the ship began to bend and twist as gravity fields that shouldn't exist started warping spacetime. "Captain," Rosa called out, "we're approaching the point of no return. Once we go full activation, we won't be able to shut it down." "How long will we have?" 17 minutes before the ship becomes uninhabitable. Maybe 20 if we're lucky. "And how much damage can we do in 17 minutes? Rosa's grin became even wider. "Enough to make the universe sit up and take notice." Petrov nodded. "Do it." The pandemonium began to change. The black hole generator created a gravitational anomaly that pulled matter from the surrounding space directly into nuclear fusion. The ship became a miniature star, burning with the light of 1,000 suns, but this was not just a massive explosion. The black hole's gravity well allowed Petrov to control the direction and intensity of the fusion reaction. He could aim stellar, fire like a weapon, and focus the power of a star into a beam narrow enough to cut through planets. The first target was the largest Devourer ship. Petrov aimed the stellar beam at its center and fired. The beam contained the concentrated power of nuclear fusion accelerated to near light speed by artificial gravity. It didn't just hit the enemy ship, it erased it from existence. The Devourer fleet recoiled in shock. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for an enemy that could wield the power of stars as a personal weapon. Their adaptation systems couldn't even begin to analyze what had happened because the attack had been made using forces that most species couldn't even detect, let alone control. But Petrov wasn't finished. For the next 16 minutes, he turned Pandemonium into a mobile supernova. The ship became a weapon of mass destruction that painted space in colors that had no names. Enemy ships that came too close were simply vaporized. Those that stayed far away were picked off by precisely aimed stellar beams. The rest of the human fleet took advantage of the chaos. While the Devourers were trying to understand how a single ship could wield the power of a star, the other human vessels pressed their attacks. They used weapons that made no sense, tactics that defied logic, and strategies that seemed to be based on pure insanity. Captain Ching's ship rammed a Devourer vessel while firing everything it had. The impact should have destroyed both ships, but Chun had timed it perfectly. Her weapons overloaded the enemy's adaptation systems just as the collision occurred, causing a cascade failure that destroyed 3 more enemy ships. Commodore Tanaka's squadron began using the Devourer's own adaptive abilities against them. They would fire one type of weapon to make the enemy adapt, then immediately switch to something completely different. By constantly changing tactics, every few seconds they kept the enemy adaptation systems in a state of confusion. The converted civilian ships proved to be even more unpredictable than the military vessels. A cargo hauler used its loading equipment to physically grab an enemy ship and throw it into another one. A research vessel created an artificial wormhole that swallowed a Devourer ship and spat it out in a different solar system. But perhaps the most effective tactic was the one used by the mining ships. They had filled their cargo holds with processed asteroids and simply threw rocks at the enemy. The Devourers had adapted to energy weapons and exotic matter, but they had no specific adaptations for being hit by large chunks of metal traveling at high speed. As the battle continued, something unprecedented began to happen. The Devourers' adaptation systems started breaking down. They had evolved over millions of years to counter logical, predictable threats. But the humans weren't logical or predictable. Every time the Devourers adapted to one human tactic, the humans would try something completely different. They didn't follow patterns that could be analyzed and countered. They fought like they were making up the rules as they went along, which was exactly what they were doing. All ships, Admiral Torres broadcast. The enemy is starting to show confusion. Press the attack and keep changing tactics. Don't let them figure out what we're doing. How can they figure out what we're doing? Captain Chun replied. We don't know what we're doing. That's the point. The Devourer fleet, which had conquered entire civilizations, found itself facing something it had never encountered before. An enemy that couldn't be understood because it didn't understand itself. When the 17 minutes were up, Captain, Petrov's ship finally exhausted its ability to maintain the stellar fusion reaction. Pandemonium went dark as its engines shut down and its crew began emergency evacuation procedures, but the damage was done. Of the 47 major Devourer ships that had entered the battle, only 12 remained functional. The rest had been destroyed by weapons that shouldn't exist, tactics that made no sense, and strategies that seemed to be based on pure chaos. The surviving Devourers tried to retreat, but the humans weren't finished with them yet. All ships, Torres ordered. Pursue and destroy. Don't let any of them escape. The human fleet chased the fleeing devourers across the solar system like pack hunters pursuing wounded prey. They had learned that their enemy could be beaten, and they intended to finish the job. By the time the last devourer ship was destroyed, the Battle of Tau Ceti had become legend. The humans had faced an enemy that had never been defeated and had not just won, but had done it in a way that redefined what victory meant. They had turned war into art, chaos into strategy, and madness into the most effective military doctrine in galactic history. The silence after the battle was almost as shocking as the battle itself. For 3 days, space around Tau Ceti had burned with the light of artificial stars and the screams of dying ships. Now there was only the quiet hum of human vessels moving through the debris field like scavengers after a storm. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of Ragnar's Wrath and watched her crew work. They were not mourning their victory or celebrating their survival. They were salvaging useful materials from the wreckage of the most powerful fleet in galactic history. "Tommy, what's our status?" she asked. Her communications officer looked up from his screens. "We lost 6 ships completely, Captain. Another 20 are heavily damaged but repairable. The rest of the fleet is mostly intact." Chun nodded. 6 ships. Lost against an enemy that had destroyed entire civilizations. It was better than anyone had hoped for. What about Petrov's ship? The Pandemonium is dead in space, but the crew survived. They're already asking if they can have some of the Devourer wreckage to build a new engine. Chun laughed. Of course they were. Captain Petrov and his people treated near-death experiences like learning opportunities. The communication system crackled to life with an incoming message from Admiral Torres. "All ships, we have incoming visitors. The Galactic Council is sending a delegation to assess the battle results." Chun frowned. She had hoped they would have more time to clean up before the aliens arrived. The battlefield was a mess of twisted metal, exotic energy signatures, and chunks of matter that no longer followed normal physics. "How long until they arrive?" she asked. 6 hours, Torres replied. "Try to make sure nothing explodes before they get here." 6 hours later, the alien delegation arrived in a fleet of pristine council ships. They moved carefully through the debris field, their sensors working overtime to catalog the destruction. The readings they got back made no sense. Ambassador Zethkar stood in the observation deck of his flagship and stared at the wreckage. He had come expecting to find the remains of brave human ships scattered among the still dangerous hulks of damaged Devourer vessels. Instead, he found something impossible. "Report," he ordered his science officer. Dr. Melanie checked her instruments 3 times before answering. "Ambassador, I am detecting no functional Devourer vessels. None. They have all been completely destroyed." "That cannot be correct. I have run the scans 5 times. The energy signatures match Devourer biotechnology, but every single vessel has been reduced to inert matter." Zethkar felt his legs shake. The Devourers had been unstoppable for millions of years. They had consumed civilizations that spanned entire galaxies, and the humans had destroyed them all in a single battle. What about human casualties? 6 ships lost, 20 damaged. The rest appear to be functional and are currently engaged in salvage operations. The alien delegation transferred to the human fleet's command ship, Admiral Torres' vessel Indomitable. The meeting room was crowded with human officers who looked tired but satisfied. They had the air of people who had just finished a difficult but successful job. Admiral Torres stood to greet the aliens. His uniform was singed and his face was streaked with soot, but he smiled warmly. "Ambassador Zethkar, welcome. I hope your trip was pleasant." Zethkar tried to process what he was seeing. These humans had just fought the most dangerous enemy in galactic history, and they were acting like they had completed routine maintenance work. "Admiral Torres, my science officer reports that you have destroyed the entire Devourer fleet." "That's correct. How?" Torres shrugged. "We shot at them until they stopped moving. Then we shot at them some more to make sure. But the Devourers were supposed to be invincible. They adapted to every weapon, every strategy, every tactic ever used against them." Captain Chung leaned back in her chair. They adapted to logical weapons and logical strategies? We didn't use logical weapons and logical strategies. I do not understand. Commodore Tanaka pulled up a tactical display showing the battle. The Devourer's adaptation systems were designed to counter threats that made sense. When faced with threats that made no sense, the systems broke down. Dr. Melanie studied the tactical data with growing amazement. You weaponize chaos itself, more or less, Torres agreed. We realized that if we couldn't outthink them, we could out-crazy them. The alien scientists spent hours trying to understand what the humans had done. The battle reports read like science fiction, ships that turned into stars, weapons that attacked the structure of reality, tactics that seemed to be based on pure randomness. This sonic weapon that disrupted their biosystems, Dr. Melanie said to Commodore Tanaka. How did you know it would work? We didn't, Tanaka replied. We just tried it to see what would happen. And the dimensional interference attack that Captain Chun used? I thought it might be interesting, Chun said. Turns out it was. The aliens looked at each other in confusion. The humans had saved the galaxy by trying things to see if they were interesting. Ambassador Zethkar cleared his throat. Admiral Torres, the Galactic Council wishes to offer humanity full membership. You would have voting rights, access to our technology databases, and trading privileges throughout Council space. The human officers looked at each other. Torres spoke for all of them. Thank you, but we'll pass. I beg your pardon? We appreciate the offer, but we prefer to do our own thing. Zethkar was stunned. But surely you want access to our advanced technology. Our star drive systems are centuries ahead of yours. Our weapons technology could revolutionize your military capabilities. Captain Chun shook her head. We like building our own stuff. It's more fun that way. More fun? Sure, where's the challenge in using weapons that someone else designed? We prefer to figure things out for ourselves. The alien delegation spent another hour trying to convince the humans to accept council membership. They offered technology, trade agreements, territorial rights, and scientific exchanges. The humans politely declined everything. All we want, Torres said finally, is to be left alone to handle our own problems our own way. We'll help out if someone asks noisily, but we don't want to join any clubs. As the aliens prepared to leave, Ambassador Zethkar had one last question. Admiral Torres, may I ask why you agreed to help us? What did you gain from this arrangement? Torres thought for a moment. Because you asked nicely and because we were bored? Bored? Space is big and mostly empty. Fighting an invincible enemy. Seemed like it might be entertaining. And was it? Torres grinned. Best fun we've had in years. After the alien delegation left, the human commanders gathered for one final briefing. The battle was over, the enemy was defeated, and their ships were repaired and ready for the journey home. So what now? Captain Chun asked. Now we go back to our regular jobs, Torres replied. You go back to hauling cargo. Tanaka goes back to running freight routes and PITROV. He looked around the room. Where is Petrov? Commodore Tanaka checked her scanners. His ship left 3 hours ago. He didn't say where he was going. Did he take any of the Devourer wreckage with him? About half of it, Torres sighed. I probably don't want to know what he's planning to build with that, Captain Chun laughed. Knowing Jakob, he's probably going to turn it into a coffee machine that can brew beverages using stellar fusion. That actually sounds useful, Tanaka said. The human fleet dispersed over the next few days. Ships that had fought together as brothers in arms went back to being competitors and strangers. The miners returned to their asteroids. The traders returned to their routes. The military vessels returned to their patrol zones, but something had changed. Word of the battle spread through human space faster than light-speed communication. The story grew with each telling. The humans who had faced the invincible enemy and won became legends. Captain Chun returned to her cargo runs, but her reputation preceded her. Pirates who had once threatened freight convoys now fled when they heard that Ragnar's wrath was in the area. Her manifest included a new item, guaranteed safe delivery backed by experience in cosmic pest control. Commodore Tanaka established a new shipping route that connected the outer colonies with the core worlds. Her ships carried a warning beacon that simply said, "Mars Free State Express, we deliver everything, including divine retribution." Attacks on her convoys dropped to zero. Admiral Torres returned to his duties with Earth Defense Command, but he found himself fielding strange requests. Other species had heard about the Battle of Tau Ceti and wanted to hire human military advisors. He politely declined most offers, but he did establish a consulting service for species facing impossible military situations. Captain Petrov and the crew of Pandemonium simply vanished into deep space. But reports began to filter in from the frontier regions. A ship that burned like a star had been seen helping colonists fight off alien raiders. The same ship had appeared near a research station that was being threatened by space pirates, and the pirates had suddenly developed an urgent need to be somewhere else. When contacted by authorities, Petrov would only say that he was conducting field tests on some new equipment, and that people shouldn't worry unless they saw him running away from something. The Galactic Council tried to understand what had happened at Tau Ceti. Their military analysts wrote reports that filled entire databases. Their scientists published papers that redefined their understanding of adaptive warfare. Their philosophers debated the implications of a species that treated impossible odds as entertainment. But the conclusion they reached was always the same. The humans had saved the galaxy not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through sheer bloody-minded determination to try things that no sane species would consider. The final report, filed by Ambassador Zethkar, became required reading in xenobiology departments throughout Council space. The last paragraph read, "When asked why they answered our call for help, Admiral Torres replied that they were bored and—" Someone had asked nervously. Further inquiry into human motivational psychology has been classified as unnecessarily dangerous to galactic mental health. It is recommended that future contact with humanity be limited to emergency situations where conventional solutions have proven inadequate. In the outer rim territories where dangers still lurked between the stars, a new saying emerged among the various species. When faced with impossible odds, someone would inevitably suggest contacting the humans. The standard response became, "Save that for when we're really desperate." Those people are crazy, but they said it with respect. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. When aliens asked for help, humanity didn't just answer the call. They answered with fire, fury, and the kind of beautiful madness that turned impossible odds into routine Tuesday entertainment. And somewhere in the void between stars, Captain Yakov Petrov was still conducting field tests on equipment that made reality nervous. The Devourers had thought they had adapted to everything the galaxy could throw at them. They had never encountered a species that adapted the galaxy to them. That had been their final mistake.